What if I told you that right now someone or something is pulling the strings of your mind without you even realizing it? It could be a coworker, a loved one, the news you scroll through every morning, or even the voice in your own head. And if you don't learn how to see it, you'll keep living a life that isn't really yours. That's the danger of manipulation. It doesn't always look obvious. It's subtle, it's quiet, and it convinces you that your happiness, your worth, your choices depend on someone else. But Stoic philosophy teaches a different way. It shows you how to build a fortress around your mind so no one can shake you. Not guilt, not fear, not even the chaos of the world itself. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how. Through the story of one man's journey from being pulled like a puppet by everyone around him to finding unshakable clarity, you'll discover how to guard your mind, protect your inner freedom, and finally start living life on your own terms. But first, I want you to ask yourself one question. Who really holds the strings of your life right now? You or someone else? It was a quiet Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago when Adam realized something wasn't right. He was standing in front of the full-length mirror of his small apartment, dressed sharply for work, tie knotted perfectly, shoes polished to a shine, but inside, he felt like someone else was living his life. He couldn't pinpoint when it had started, but over the past year, he had been bending to everyone's expectations at the office. He was doing extra favors for people he barely knew, saying yes to unreasonable demands, apologizing for things that weren't his fault. Each time he complied, he felt a little more hollow. He had convinced himself that he was being a team player, but in reality, he was slowly being manipulated by the people around him. The manipulation didn't come in dramatic, obvious ways. No one was threatening him or yelling at him. Instead, it was subtle. A coworker using guilt to get him to stay late and finish their work. A manager dangling vague promises of promotion to get him to accept extra tasks. Friends who only seemed to call when they needed something. Adam's boundaries were being eroded like a shoreline under a rising tide. He told himself that one day he would stand up for himself. But that day never came. And every time he caved in, he lost a little more respect for himself. That morning, as he looked at his own tired eyes in the mirror, Adam felt something shift. He remembered reading a quote from Marcus Aurelius months ago. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." The words hit him differently now. He realized he had been giving away control of his mind, letting other people's desires, fears, and emotions dictate his own. He didn't know exactly how to stop it, but he knew he had to start guarding his mind, because if he didn't, no one else would. What Adam didn't know then is that he was standing at the threshold of one of life's greatest lessons, the quiet war between Stoicism and manipulation. The modern world is full of people, systems, and forces that will happily pull the strings of your mind if you let them. Manipulation isn't always malicious, but it is always dangerous because it slowly convinces you that your value, your happiness, your sense of self are determined by someone else. Stoicism, on the other hand, is the ancient art of reclaiming that control. It's not about being cold or unfeeling. It's about building a fortress around your mind so that the storms outside can't dictate the weather within. Pause for a second and ask yourself, how many times have you acted against your better judgment because you feared what someone might think? How often have you said yes when every part of you wanted to say no? And how many nights have you lain awake replaying conversations in your head, wondering why you let someone else's words hurt you so deeply? If these questions sting, you're not alone, and here's the truth. The people who manipulate you, whether intentionally or not, aren't the real problem. The real problem is the door you leave unlocked in your own mind. Stoicism teaches you how to lock that door, how to build clarity and strength so that no one can exploit your emotions or your insecurities. But learning this isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's something you practice every day in small choices, in how you respond to the world around you. Imagine your mind as a fortress perched high on a mountain. Manipulation is like a clever enemy trying to infiltrate your walls. They don't usually come crashing in with force. They slip in disguised as friends. They whisper doubts into your ear. They make you question your worth. But a Stoic doesn't leave the gate unguarded. A Stoic notices the attempt, steps back, and asks, "Is this true, or is this just noise?" And this is where Adam's journey really began. Have you ever noticed how quickly you can lose yourself in the noise of other people's opinions? It's like standing in a crowded room where everyone is shouting their expectations at you. If you don't have a strong center, you'll spend your life chasing approval you'll never fully receive. But imagine for a moment what it would feel like to stand calmly in that same room, untouched by the noise, anchored in your own values. That's the power Stoicism offers you. Rehook. The question is, are you ready to stop being pulled like a puppet on someone else's strings? Because what we're about to explore will challenge the way you see every interaction in your life. It will show you that the real battle is not out there with manipulative people. It's inside your own mind. Adam started small. He began by observing how often he said yes out of fear rather than choice. When a coworker asked him to stay late, he paused. Instead of automatically agreeing, he asked himself, "Is this aligned with my values, or am I just afraid of disappointing them?" This simple pause was revolutionary. It gave him a gap between the stimulus and his response, a core Stoic principle. But the world doesn't always respond kindly when you stop being easy to manipulate. Some people became distant, others grew frustrated. They were used to Adam bending to their needs, and now he was quietly setting boundaries. He wasn't rude or defensive. He simply said things like, "I can't take that on right now," or "I appreciate the offer, but I'm not available." At first, it felt awkward, but each time he stood his ground, he felt a little stronger, like he was reclaiming a piece of himself. One night, Adam's manager called him at 9 p.m., asking if he could prepare a last-minute report. Normally, he would have sighed and said yes, but this time he took a breath and calmly said, "I can work on it first thing tomorrow morning, but I'm off for the night." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. Then his manager simply said, "Okay." Adam hung up and realized something profound. Most manipulation only works if you allow it. This isn't about becoming a rigid person who never helps others. Stoicism isn't selfishness, it's clarity. It's the ability to choose when you give instead of giving because you're afraid. It's the difference between generosity and people-pleasing. Rehook. Picture yourself walking through your daily life with that same sense of clarity Adam just discovered. How different would your relationships feel if you stopped fearing the discomfort of saying no? How much more respect would you have for yourself? And here's the deeper question. If you can't guard your own mind, how can you ever hope to build a life that's truly yours? As Adam's confidence grew, he started noticing manipulation in places he had never considered before. Advertising, for example. He realized that entire industries were built on making people feel incomplete, insecure, and in need of the latest product to fix themselves. He saw how political campaigns used fear to push voters in a certain direction, how social media algorithms rewarded outrage because it kept people clicking. The world suddenly looked different, like he had been living under a spell and was finally waking up. But awakening can feel lonely at first. Once you see the strings, you can't unsee them. Adam found himself questioning relationships he had never questioned before. Were these people truly his friends? Or had he been filling roles in their lives that served them more than they served him? He began to value solitude, because in solitude he could hear his own voice again. Adam started to enjoy the stillness of his own company. For the first time in years, he wasn't filling every quiet moment with noise, music, podcasts, scrolling on his phone. Instead, he took long walks in the park after work, noticing how the leaves whispered in the wind, how the evening light turned the city golden. These small moments reminded him of another Stoic idea he'd once read. Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul. But solitude also brought up uncomfortable truths. He realized how much of his identity had been built on seeking approval from others. At work, he had been the dependable one, the guy who would always pick up the slack. In his social life, he was the one who said yes to every favor, every last-minute plan, even when he was exhausted. Who was he when he stopped performing those roles? That question scared him more than he wanted to admit. One Saturday afternoon, he met his old friend James for coffee. James was charismatic, charming, the kind of guy who always seemed to have people orbiting around him. But as they talked, Adam noticed things he hadn't before. James constantly interrupted, steering the conversation back to himself. He made subtle digs at Adam's choices, the kind that sounded like jokes, but landed with a sting. At one point, James asked Adam for a small favor, helping him move next weekend, despite knowing Adam had an important deadline at work. In the past, Adam would have agreed instantly, even rearranged his schedule, but this time he felt a strange clarity. He smiled politely and said, "I'd like to help, but I can't commit to that right now." James's face shifted. "Man, you've changed," he said, half joking, half accusing. Adam didn't flinch. "I guess I have," he replied calmly. Walking home, Adam realized how often manipulation hides behind words like friendship, loyalty, and teamwork. He wasn't accusing James of being a bad person, but he saw now that people, even those who care about you, can slip into patterns where your kindness becomes their convenience. Rehook. Have you ever noticed how the people in your life react when you stop giving them the easy version of you? Do they respect your boundaries or do they push back harder? That reaction reveals more than you might think. At work, the changes became even more noticeable. Colleagues who once leaned on Adam for extra tasks began seeking out others. At first, this made him feel guilty, like he was letting people down. But then he saw the reality. He was simply refusing to be the default option for everyone's problems. And something unexpected happened. His work improved. Without the constant distraction of carrying other people's responsibilities, he could finally focus on his own projects. He felt sharper, more deliberate. One evening, as he was packing up his desk, his manager stopped by. "You've been more focused lately," she said. "Your last report was excellent." Adam thanked her, and on the way home he thought about how much mental energy he had wasted in the past trying to please everyone. It was like carrying a backpack full of rocks he didn't need. Now that weight was slowly lifting. He began journaling at night, a habit inspired by Marcus Aurelius. Each page became a space to untangle his thoughts. He wrote about the times he had felt manipulated and what he could have done differently. He wrote about the moments he felt strong and why. Through this process, he saw a pattern emerge. Manipulation almost always worked on him when he was tired, distracted, or unsure of himself. But when he was grounded in his values, when he had taken time to reflect, it was much harder for anyone to push him off balance. Rehook. What about you? If you looked back over the times you felt manipulated, would you see the same pattern? And what would change in your life if you began treating your mind as something sacred, something worth protecting at all costs? The shift wasn't just internal. People around Adam began treating him differently. Some respected him more, others quietly drifted away. He understood now that not everyone would celebrate his growth, and that was okay. Stoicism taught him that he couldn't control who stayed or who left. He could only control the kind of man he chose to be. But the real test came during a quarterly meeting at work. Adam was asked on the spot to take on a high-profile project that would require him to work nights and weekends for the next 2 months. His manager framed it as a huge opportunity, but Adam could see the trap. The scope was unrealistic and it would leave him burned out. A few months ago, he would have said yes without hesitation. He paused. He felt the familiar urge to please, the voice in his head saying, "If you say no, they'll be disappointed. You'll look uncommitted." But another voice, the one he had been cultivating, spoke louder. "What will it cost you if you say yes? Is this aligned with your values?" He looked at his manager and said, I appreciate the offer, but I can't commit to this timeline without compromising the quality of my work. If we can adjust the scope or extend the deadline, I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I'll need to pass." The room went silent. He could feel every eye on him. Then his manager nodded slowly. "Let's talk about the scope," she said. Adam walked out of that meeting with a steady heartbeat. He didn't feel triumphant or cocky. He just felt centered, and that was enough. Rehook. Imagine yourself in Adam's shoes at that meeting. Would you have had the courage to pause, to stand firm, to calmly express your limits? And if not, how much of your life might be shaped by other people's expectations rather than your own choices? That night, Adam sat on his balcony, the city lights twinkling below. He realized that guarding his mind wasn't about building walls so high that no one could reach him. It was about choosing who and what he allowed inside. It was about saying yes from a place of strength instead of fear. As the weeks passed, Adam began to realize that the biggest threat to his mental fortress wasn't always the obvious manipulators in his life. It was the silent, invisible influences that crept in through the cracks. He started paying closer attention to the world around him, the advertisements that promised happiness if only he bought one more product, the news headlines designed to provoke outrage, the constant stream of curated lives on social media that made him feel like he wasn't doing enough. One evening, scrolling through his phone, he noticed how his mood had shifted without him even realizing it. 10 minutes earlier, he had felt calm. Now he felt restless, vaguely dissatisfied. He paused and asked himself, why? What just changed? The answer was obvious. He had unconsciously compared his life to the highlight reels of strangers. He wasn't even aware it was happening until he stopped to notice. This was a breakthrough. Adam began practicing a habit. Whenever he felt a sudden pull of emotion, whether it was envy, anger, or fear, he would pause and trace it back to its source. Most of the time, he found that something external had triggered it. But the Stoics taught him a vital truth. The trigger wasn't the problem. The problem was letting the trigger control him. He remembered a line from Epictetus. "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." This became his mantra. He couldn't stop the world from trying to manipulate him, but he could decide what he let in. Rehook. When was the last time you stopped to notice how much of your emotional state was being shaped by forces outside your control? And what would your life look like if you could reclaim that power? Adam began experimenting with small changes. He set time limits on his social media apps and replaced the habit of scrolling with journaling or reading. He started consuming news only once a day from sources he trusted, instead of grazing on fear-driven headlines every hour. He unsubscribed from marketing emails that preyed on his insecurities. None of these changes were dramatic, but they added up. For the first time, he felt like the gatekeeper of his own attention. But as his awareness deepened, Adam also realized that manipulation wasn't always coming from outside. Sometimes the voice that tried to control him was his own. He caught himself thinking things like, "If I say no, they won't like me," or "I'm not good enough for this opportunity." These weren't facts. They were stories he had been telling himself for years. Stories designed to keep him small, safe, compliant. And here's the hardest truth. Self-manipulation can be even more dangerous than what others do to you because it wears the mask of familiarity. Adam had to learn to challenge his own thoughts with the same vigilance he used on the world. When he caught himself spiraling, he would ask, "Is this true, or is this just fear talking?" One Friday night, he was invited to a networking event. The old Adam would have gone, even though he was exhausted, because he didn't want to miss an opportunity or disappoint anyone. But this time, he stopped and asked himself, why am I going? Out of genuine interest, or because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? He decided to stay home and rest. To his surprise, the world didn't collapse. He woke up the next morning refreshed and clear-minded. Rehook. How often do you manipulate yourself with fear or guilt, pushing yourself into choices that don't serve you? And what would it feel like to live from intention instead of obligation? As Adam built this inner clarity, something remarkable happened. People could no longer push his buttons so easily. One day, a co-worker tried to pressure him into covering a shift. "Come on, Adam," she said. "If you don't do it, the whole team is going to be behind. You don't want to be the reason we fail, do you?" Adam felt the familiar sting of guilt. But instead of caving in, he took a breath and said, "I understand it's stressful, but I can't take that on. I trust the team will find a solution." The co-worker looked surprised, maybe even a little annoyed, but she backed off. Moments like this reminded Adam that true strength wasn't about never feeling pressure. It was about noticing the pressure and refusing to let it dictate your actions. Rehook. Picture your own life for a moment. Who or what pushes your buttons the most? And what would it mean for you to take that power back, not with anger or aggression, but with quiet, unshakable resolve? Adam's sense of self-mastery continued to grow, but he knew he wasn't invincible. There were still moments when old patterns crept in, when the need for approval tugged at him like a shadow. One evening, he found himself drafting a long text message to a friend who had been distant lately, over-explaining why he hadn't reached out, hoping to win back their attention. Halfway through typing, he caught himself. Why am I doing this? Am I acting from strength or from fear? He deleted the message. Sitting there in the quiet, Adam understood something profound. The battle against manipulation is never really won. It's a daily practice. Each day brings new influences, new pressures, new temptations to betray yourself. But each day also offers a chance to choose differently. He smiled, closed his laptop, and poured himself a cup of tea. The city outside buzzed with noise, but inside, he felt still. The next real test of Adam's growth didn't come at work or from casual friends. It came from the people closest to him, the ones whose opinions mattered most. One Sunday, Adam's sister Emily called him out of the blue. She was going through a tough time financially and asked if he could loan her a significant amount of money. In the past, Adam would have agreed instantly, even if it meant draining his savings, because the thought of disappointing family felt unbearable. But now he paused. He listened carefully as Emily explained her situation. He could hear the strain in her voice, the subtle edge of guilt-tinged persuasion. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it," she said softly. Adam cared deeply for his sister, but he also knew that helping out of fear wasn't real help. He took a breath. "Emily, I love you, and I want to support you, but I need to do it in a way that's sustainable. I can help with part of the amount, but not the full sum. Would that still be useful?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Emily sighed. "I guess so, thanks." Adam could sense her disappointment, and for a moment guilt clawed at him, but he reminded himself, true boundaries often feel uncomfortable at first. He was still helping, just not at the cost of his own stability. Rehook. How often do you give more than you can afford, emotionally, financially, or mentally, just to avoid the sting of disappointing someone you love? And what would it look like to draw a line even when it's hard? Emily's request wasn't the last challenge. A few weeks later, Adam faced a far deeper test of his resolve. One evening, he discovered that a close colleague, someone he considered a friend, had been spreading false rumors about him at work. The news hit like a punch to the gut. He felt anger rising in his chest, the kind that made him want to storm into the office and confront them immediately. But then he remembered emotions are natural, but they don't have to be in control. He sat quietly in his apartment, letting the first wave of anger pass. When he could think clearly, he asked himself, what response would a Stoic choose? What action aligns with my values, not just my feelings? The next day, Adam requested a private meeting with the colleague. He didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply said, I've heard that you've been saying things about me that aren't true. I'd like to understand why. The colleague squirmed, denying at first, then admitting they'd spoken out of frustration. I'm sorry, they mumbled. Adam nodded. I appreciate the apology, but I want to be clear. I expect this to stop. If there's an issue with my work, I'm open to feedback, but gossip undermines everyone. Walking out of that meeting, Adam didn't feel vindicated. He felt calm. He had protected his reputation without letting anger control him. Rehook. Think about a time someone wronged you. Did you react from anger, or did you choose a response that honored your own integrity? Which one left you feeling stronger? Adam's ability to stay grounded even when hurt or betrayed began to transform how people saw him. Colleagues noticed his composure and started seeking his advice. Friends came to him for perspective when their own lives felt chaotic. But Adam knew this wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about living by the principle Marcus Aurelius had once written, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Still, even with his growing clarity, Adam realized the world wasn't slowing down its attempts to manipulate him. One night he watched the evening news and felt the familiar tug of fear-based headlines designed to keep viewers glued to the screen. The stories weren't just informing, they were inflaming. He turned off the TV and sat in silence. He asked himself, how much of what I believe is truly mine, and how much has been fed to me by someone with an agenda? That question haunted him for days. He began reading widely, seeking perspectives from different sources, learning to think critically instead of accepting things at face value. He understood now that manipulation wasn't limited to personal relationships. It was baked into entire systems, advertising, media, politics. And the only way to resist was to stay awake. Rehook. What would your life look like if you stopped absorbing every headline, every advertisement, every social media post as if it were absolute truth? How much stronger would your mind become if you questioned instead of blindly accepting? One afternoon, Adam went for a run along the lakefront. The air was crisp, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore reminded him how life was like the water, always moving, always unpredictable. He realized that his goal wasn't to control the waves. That was impossible. His goal was to stay steady no matter how rough the water became. As he jogged past strangers on the path, he wondered how many of them felt the same invisible pressures he once did, constantly pulled by expectations, fears, and desires that weren't truly their own. He wished he could tell them what he had learned, that freedom doesn't come from trying to change the world, but from mastering the world inside your own mind. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Adam sat on his balcony with a journal in his lap. He wrote down a simple promise to himself. I will guard my mind as if it were the most valuable thing I own, because it is. He didn't feel like he had arrived. There was no finish line, no perfect version of himself waiting at the end of the journey. But he did feel steady, and that was enough. A few months later, Adam found himself in a situation that tested everything he had learned. His company announced a major restructuring. Whispers filled the office about layoffs and demotions. People were panicking, gossiping in corners, forming alliances out of fear. Adam could feel the tension in the air, like static electricity, and the uncertainty was contagious. One afternoon, his manager called him into a meeting with a senior executive. We're making some changes, the executive said, in a practiced corporate tone. We'd like you to take on a new leadership role, but there's a catch. You'll need to oversee a round of layoffs. We need someone who can convince the team to accept the changes without too much resistance. Adam sat silently for a moment. He understood what was being asked. It wasn't just about managing layoffs. It was about selling a narrative, calming people down while cutting their jobs. It felt like a subtle form of manipulation, dressed up as leadership. He could feel the weight of the offer pressing on him. This role came with a pay raise and more visibility, but at what cost? He remembered his own experiences being pressured into silence, into saying yes when everything inside him said no. He took a deep breath. "I need to think about it," he said calmly. That night, Adam walked the city streets, the neon lights blurring past as his thoughts raced. He asked himself the question he had learned to ask in moments of pressure. Is this aligned with my values, or am I just afraid of missing out? The answer was clear. Rehook, how many times have you accepted something just because you feared losing an opportunity? And how different would your life be if you made choices based on principle, not fear? The next morning, Adam met with his manager. "I'm grateful for the offer," he said, "but I'm not the right person for this role. I won't lead in a way that asks people to accept something they don't understand or believe in." There was a pause, then his manager frowned. "You're sure about this? Opportunities like this don't come around often." "I'm sure," Adam replied. Walking out of the office, he felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew he had stayed true to himself, and that was worth more than any title. In the weeks that followed, Adam saw how fear could spread like wildfire in a group. Rumors about layoffs grew wilder, dividing the team into cliques. Some people turned on each other, trying to protect themselves. Watching it all unfold, Adam understood why the Stoics spoke so often about self-mastery. If you couldn't control your own mind, the collective fear of others would swallow you whole. Instead of feeding into the panic, Adam focused on what he could control. He did his job well. He supported his colleagues with kindness, but didn't get drawn into the drama. One evening, a coworker whispered, "Aren't you scared you'll be next on the chopping block?" Adam smiled gently. "Of course I feel uncertainty, but worrying about something I can't control won't change the outcome. I'm better off doing my best work and staying centered." Rehook, imagine being in a storm while everyone around you is panicking. Would you be the one who joins the chaos, or the one who stands firm and brings calm to the room? As the restructuring continued, Adam noticed that his steadiness was contagious. People began seeking him out, asking for advice. "How do you stay so calm?" one colleague asked. Adam didn't give a speech. He just said, "I try to focus on what's mine to control and let go of the rest." But the ultimate test came when Adam was called into another meeting. This time the news was personal. His role was being eliminated. He had expected it might happen, yet hearing the word still sent a wave of sadness through him. He nodded quietly, asking a few practical questions about severance and next steps. When the meeting ended, he packed up his belongings. As he carried the box out of the building, he felt the temptation to spiral, to replay every decision, to wonder if he should have taken the leadership role after all. But then he stopped himself. He thought of Marcus Aurelius's words, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Adam realized that losing his job didn't change who he was. It was just another event outside his control. What mattered was how he responded. Rehook, when life knocks you down, do you see it as a reflection of your worth, or as an opportunity to build something new? Which belief will leave you stronger in the end? That night, Adam sat in his apartment, looking at the Chicago skyline. He didn't have a clear plan for what came next, but he felt something deeper than certainty. He felt freedom. He wasn't tethered to anyone else's approval. He wasn't afraid of starting over. He knew that the same clarity that had carried him through manipulation and fear would carry him through this too. He took out his journal and wrote, "I will not be owned by fear or by the illusions of control. My mind is mine, and that is enough." The first morning after losing his job was the hardest. Adam woke up early out of habit, sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and stared at the blank page of his journal. The quiet felt heavier now, as if the walls of his apartment were closing in. He couldn't ignore the voice in his head whispering, "You failed. You're behind. Everyone else is moving forward while you're standing still." He knew that voice wasn't telling the truth, but that didn't make it any easier to silence. He reminded himself of the Stoic practice of naming emotions instead of being consumed by them. "This is fear," he wrote in his journal. "This is the need for certainty, but my worth is not tied to a title or a paycheck." Still, the days ahead weren't simple. Each time Adam opened social media, he saw former colleagues posting about promotions and new opportunities. It was tempting to compare, to measure his value by the success of others, but he was determined to guard his mind. He deleted the apps from his phone and decided to focus entirely on the present, on what he could control. Instead of rushing to apply for every job he could find, Adam took time to reflect. What did he actually want? What kind of work aligned with his values? He realized that for years he had been climbing a ladder that didn't lead anywhere he truly wanted to go. Losing his job, painful as it was, might be the gift he needed to reevaluate everything. Rehook. When was the last time you slowed down long enough to ask yourself if the life you're building is the one you actually want? And how much courage would it take to change course if the answer is no? Adam began his days with long walks by the lake, letting the rhythm of his steps clear his mind. He meditated for 10 minutes each morning, focusing on his breath. These practices weren't dramatic, but they gave him a sense of stability when everything else felt uncertain. One afternoon, he met an old mentor for lunch. She listened patiently as Adam explained his situation, then asked, "What would you work on if you weren't afraid of failure or judgment?" The question caught him off guard. He thought for a moment and said, "I'd start something of my own, something that helps people live with more clarity, less fear, but I'm not sure I have what it takes." His mentor smiled. "That's fear talking. You already know what you want to do. The only question is whether you're willing to take the first step." That conversation stayed with Adam. He spent the next few weeks brainstorming ideas, sketching out possibilities. He didn't have a perfect plan, but he realized he didn't need one. All he needed was the courage to begin. Rehook. How many dreams have you buried under the excuse of "I'm not ready yet"? And what if the truth is that you'll never feel ready, but you can start anyway? Adam decided to launch a small consulting practice, helping individuals and teams develop mental resilience through Stoic principles. It felt risky. He had no guarantee it would work, and the temptation to retreat to a traditional job was strong. But he reminded himself that growth always carries uncertainty. He started with one client, then two. He hosted a free online workshop that slowly began to attract attention. The work was challenging, but it felt meaningful. He was no longer simply trading time for a paycheck. He was building something that reflected his deepest values. But the journey was far from smooth. Some months were lean, and the financial pressure was real. There were moments when Adam questioned everything, when he lay awake at night wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. In those moments, he returned to the simplest Stoic practices. Focus on what you can control, let go of what you can't. Rehook. When life gets uncertain, do you cling tighter to control, or do you learn to loosen your grip and trust the process? Which path leads to strength, and which leads to exhaustion? As Adam's consulting work grew slowly but steadily, he began receiving messages from people who had attended his workshops. One wrote, "Your talk helped me set boundaries with my family for the first time in years. I feel free." Another said, "I used to let fear run my life. Now I'm learning how to stand up for myself." These messages reminded Adam why he had started. He wasn't just rebuilding his career, he was helping others guard their minds the way he had learned to guard his own. That purpose fueled him through the hard days. One evening, he looked around his small home office, nothing fancy, just a desk, a laptop, and a bookshelf lined with worn Stoic texts, and realized he felt a kind of peace he had never known in his old job. It wasn't because everything was perfect. It was because he was finally living in alignment with his values. As Adam's consulting practice slowly gained momentum, he began to face new kinds of challenges, ones he hadn't anticipated. Success, even modest success, attracts attention. Some of it was positive, but some carried a familiar edge of manipulation dressed as opportunity. One afternoon, he received an email from a large corporate client who had attended one of his workshops. They wanted to hire him for an ongoing contract, one that would nearly double his income overnight. But there was a catch. They asked him to adjust his content to make it more palatable for their senior management. "We love your emphasis on personal integrity and boundaries," the email read, "but we'd prefer you to downplay the parts about questioning leadership or challenging the status quo. We don't want to cause disruption." Adam stared at the message. He knew what they were asking: dilute the core of his teachings to fit a narrative that kept people compliant. A part of him was tempted. The money would ease the constant financial pressure. It would validate his choice to step away from corporate life. But he could also feel the familiar weight of compromise creeping in. He closed his laptop and went for a long walk by the lake, letting the cold wind clear his thoughts. He remembered how easy it was to justify small compromises. "Just this once," the mind whispers. "You can always go back to your values later." But Adam knew better. Each compromise was a brick removed from the fortress he had worked so hard to build. Rehook. How often do we sell pieces of our integrity for comfort, convenience, or recognition? And how many of those trades leave us emptier than we were before? The next morning, Adam responded politely but firmly. "I appreciate the offer," he wrote, "but I can't alter my message to fit a narrative that doesn't align with my values. I hope you understand." He hit send, then leaned back in his chair. There was no sense of triumph, just a quiet steadiness. He knew he might have walked away from a major opportunity, but he also knew he had chosen freedom over fear. Not long after, Adam was approached by a charismatic entrepreneur at a networking event. "You're doing great work," the man said with a charming smile, "but you're thinking too small. I can help you scale this thing fast. We'll package your ideas, automate the programs, make it more appealing for mass audiences. You'll be rich within a year." Adam listened carefully. The entrepreneur's pitch was seductive, full of grand promises. But as he asked more questions, the holes began to show. The plan required Adam to sign away creative control and turn his workshops into something more like a self-help gimmick. He could almost feel the strings tightening. This time, Adam didn't need a long walk to think it through. He simply smiled and said, "Thank you, but I'm not interested." The entrepreneur looked surprised. "You're really going to pass up a chance to scale this big?" "I'm going to stay true to why I started this work," Adam replied. "If that means growing slower, so be it." Rehook. When was the last time you said no to something that everyone else thought you'd be crazy to refuse? And what did that no teach you about yourself? But temptation wasn't the only challenge Adam faced. Success brought attention from people who didn't always have good intentions. A former colleague reached out, asking for advice on starting their own consulting business. Adam generously shared his process, only to discover weeks later that they had copied his materials and undercut his pricing. The betrayal stung, but Adam resisted the urge to retaliate. He reminded himself that someone else's dishonesty couldn't take away his integrity or the trust he had built with his clients. "Focus on what you can control," he told himself. "Do your work well, and the rest will follow." These experiences deepened Adam's understanding of Stoicism. Guarding the mind wasn't just about resisting obvious manipulation or fear. It was about resisting the subtler traps of ego, greed, and resentment. It was about staying steady when success threatened to pull him off balance just as much as failure once had. Rehook. Are you strong enough to stay grounded when life begins to reward you? Or will the promise of more money, more status, more attention make you forget what truly matters? As months turned into a year, Adam's practice reached a new level of stability. He wasn't wealthy, but he was earning enough to live comfortably. More importantly, he was waking up every day with a sense of purpose. He was helping people reclaim their minds from the forces that once owned him. One evening, after finishing a workshop for a group of young professionals, Adam was approached by a woman who had been quiet during the session. "I want you to know," she said softly, "what you taught today probably saved me. I've been in a toxic relationship for years, and I finally see that I have the power to walk away." Adam felt a lump in his throat. He thought back to the man he had been just a few years earlier, the man who couldn't say no, who was owned by fear, who lived for everyone else's approval. He realized how far he had come. That night he sat on his balcony, the cool air brushing against his face, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. His journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every step. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Adam received a call from David, one of his closest friends and a person he had trusted for years. David's voice carried a sense of urgency. "Adam, I'm in trouble," he said. "I need your help. I've invested in a business deal that's falling apart, and if I can't cover the losses, I could lose everything. You've built something stable now. I was hoping you could lend me the money, just until I get back on my feet." Adam felt his stomach tighten. He cared for David deeply. They had supported each other through difficult times in the past, but the amount David was asking for wasn't small. It was nearly all of Adam's savings. He knew this wasn't a decision he could make lightly. "Can you give me some details?" Adam asked gently. David was vague, avoiding specifics, but his desperation was clear. "Please, Adam, you know I'd do the same for you." That night, Adam sat in his apartment, the sound of the rain against the windows matching the storm inside his head. He wanted to help, but he also recognized the familiar pull of guilt, the same pull that had once led him to sacrifice his well-being for others. He asked himself the question he had learned to ask in every difficult moment. What would a choice rooted in clarity look like? What would a choice rooted in fear look like? Rehook. How often do we mistake guilt for love and obligation for loyalty? And how many of those choices cost us more than we can afford to give? The next day, Adam met David for coffee. He listened carefully as David repeated his plea. Then Adam took a breath and said, "David, I want to help you, but I can't give you the amount you're asking for. It would put me at risk too. I can offer a smaller amount, no strings attached, but I can't jeopardize my own stability." David's face hardened. "Wow," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "I guess I know where we stand. After all these years, you can't even back me up when I need you most?" Adam felt a sharp pang in his chest. He had feared this reaction, and part of him wanted to backtrack, to smooth things over, but he stayed still. "I care about you, David. That hasn't changed, but I can't make a decision from fear. I hope you understand." David stood up abruptly and walked out without another word. Rehook. Imagine standing firm in a moment like that, watching someone you love walk away because you refuse to compromise your boundaries. Could you hold your ground, or would you fold just to stop the pain? The days that followed were heavy. Adam missed David's friendship. He questioned whether he had made the right decision. But deep down he knew that lending the money out of guilt would have only created resentment if things went wrong. He had seen too many relationships destroyed by financial entanglements. Weeks passed, and Adam heard through mutual friends that David had blamed him for his financial collapse. The betrayal cut deep. Adam wanted to defend himself, to call David and explain again. But then he remembered what the Stoics had taught him. You can't control how others perceive you. You can only control your own actions. Instead of lashing out or trying to fix the narrative, Adam chose silence. He focused on his work, his clients, and the life he was building. Slowly, the pain softened. One evening, as he sat on his balcony journaling, Adam wrote, "Pain is inevitable. Losing people is inevitable, but I refuse to lose myself in the process." Rehook. What would your life look like if you stopped trying to control how others see you and instead focused only on living by your own principles? Not long after, Adam received an unexpected email. It was from David. "I'm sorry," the message read. "I was angry and scared. I shouldn't have put that on you. I hope we can talk." Adam felt a wave of relief, but also a deep sense of clarity. Whether or not the friendship could be repaired, he knew he had made the right choice. Boundaries had cost him pain, but they had also given him peace. Months later, Adam faced a challenge that shook him deeper than anything before. It wasn't about money, friendships, or even his work. It was about the world itself, the swirling chaos of events far beyond his control. A global crisis erupted, sending waves of uncertainty through every part of society. Businesses closed overnight, markets crashed, news channels ran 24-hour cycles of fear and speculation. Clients began canceling contracts, not out of malice, but because they were struggling to survive. Adam watched his hard-earned consulting practice, something he had poured his heart into, start to unravel piece by piece. He could feel the old anxiety rising, the familiar voice whispering, "You're losing everything. You should panic. Do something, anything, to stop this." But Adam had learned enough from Stoic philosophy to know that panic solves nothing. He reminded himself of Epictetus's words, "Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens." Still, the temptation to spiral was strong. He spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering how he would pay rent if the cancellations continued. But each morning he forced himself to return to the practices that had carried him this far. Journaling, walking by the lake, pausing before reacting. Rehook. When the world seems to be falling apart around you, what anchors you? Do you let fear sweep you away, or do you plant your feet and hold fast to your principles? One evening, Adam received a message from a former client. "We'd love for you to host an online workshop," they said, "but we can't pay you. Could you do it as a favor?" At first, Adam wanted to say no. He needed paying work, not volunteer opportunities. But then he remembered why he had started, to help people build resilience, just as he had learned through Stoic philosophy. He decided to do the workshop, not out of desperation, but because it aligned with his values. The session was intimate, raw, and honest. Adam spoke openly about fear, about how easy it is to be manipulated by the chaos of the world when you aren't guarding your mind. He shared how Stoic philosophy had taught him to separate what was in his control from what was not, and how that clarity had saved him more than once. The response was overwhelming. Attendees shared the workshop with friends who shared it with others. Suddenly, Adam was being invited to speak at more virtual events. Some paid, some not, but the momentum grew naturally. He wasn't chasing opportunities, he was simply showing up with integrity, again and again. Rehook. Have you noticed how life often opens doors when you stop clinging so tightly to outcomes and start focusing on what you can truly control? But the external pressure didn't disappear. The crisis dragged on, and there were still more cancellations than new contracts. One night, Adam received a phone call from his landlord, hinting that if rent wasn't paid on time, he would need to reevaluate the arrangement. The fear came flooding back. For a moment, Adam considered reaching out to anyone and everyone for help, even taking jobs that would compromise his mission. But he stopped himself. He asked the same question he had been asking since the beginning. What would a Stoic do? What choice aligns with my values, not my fears? He took a breath and called his landlord back. "I want to be upfront," Adam said calmly. "I'm facing a cash flow issue due to the crisis, but I'm working to resolve it. If you need me to move out, I'll respect that, but I'd appreciate a little more time." To his surprise, the landlord softened. "I understand," he said. "You've always been reliable. We'll work something out." Adam hung up the phone and realized something profound. The strength he had built through Stoic philosophy didn't just protect his mind from manipulation. It allowed him to move through life with dignity, even when everything around him was uncertain. Rehook. How differently would you navigate life if you truly believed your inner state could remain unshaken, no matter how chaotic the world became? Adam knew the storm wasn't over, But he also knew he no longer needed perfect circumstances to feel at peace. He was ready for whatever came next. The crisis didn't end quickly. Weeks turned into months, and the world continued to shift in ways no one could predict. Adam's practice had stabilized just enough to keep him afloat, but the uncertainty never fully disappeared. Then, one morning, he received a message that would test him more than anything before. A large media company invited him to speak at a televised event about resilience in uncertain times. It was the biggest platform he had ever been offered, but as he read the details, his heart sank. The company wanted to pre-approve his speech. They sent him a script filled with empty slogans and polished platitudes that had nothing to do with the hard-earned truths of Stoic philosophy. "Just stick to the script," their representative said on a call. "People need hope, not lectures about personal responsibility or questioning the systems they live in. This is about keeping everyone positive." Adam hung up and stared out his window at the gray Chicago skyline. This was everything he had dreamed of, the chance to reach millions of people. But was it worth saying words he didn't believe? Words that might soothe but would not strengthen? He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the countless moments he had chosen integrity over convenience, clarity over fear. If he compromised now, what would all those choices have been for? Rehook. How much of yourself are you willing to give away just to be seen, to be approved of, to belong? And what would it feel like to be free of that need forever? Adam called the company back. His voice was steady. "Thank you for the opportunity," he said, "but I can't deliver a message I don't believe in. If you'd like me to speak in my own words, I'm in. If not, I'll have to decline." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then the representative sighed. "We'll be in touch," they said curtly, before hanging up. Days passed without a response. Adam assumed the opportunity was gone, and he made peace with it. He reminded himself of a line from Marcus Aurelius: "It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them." He couldn't lose what wasn't truly his to control. Then, out of nowhere, the media company called back. "We've decided to let you speak your own message," the representative said. "Do it your way." Adam felt a quiet gratitude wash over him, but not triumph. Whether 10 people listened or 10 million, the real victory was internal. He had stayed true to himself. On the night of the event, he walked onto the stage under bright lights, the cameras trained on him. He took a deep breath and began. "I'm not here to give you easy answers," Adam said, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to tell you the truth. The world will always be uncertain. There will always be forces trying to control you through fear, guilt, and desire. But you are not powerless. Stoic philosophy teaches us that we control one thing and one thing only: the state of our own mind. Guard it, protect it, treat it as if it were the most precious thing you own, because it is." As he spoke, Adam saw faces in the audience change. He could feel the room growing still, the noise of the outside world fading for just a moment. He wasn't telling them what they wanted to hear, he was telling them what they needed to hear. Rehook. Imagine living your life with that kind of inner strength, where the opinions, crises, and manipulations of the world can't shake the core of who you are. What would that freedom be worth to you? When the event ended, Adam stepped outside into the cool night air. The city was alive around him, honking cars and flashing lights, but he felt a profound sense of quiet. He knew the challenges wouldn't stop. There would be more losses, more tests, more people and systems trying to pull at his strings. But he also knew something deeper. He was no longer the man who could be controlled by those forces. He had learned to stand firm, to guard the fortress of his mind, to live not for the world's approval, but for his own principles. He thought back to the quote that had started it all, the one he had read in the mirror that morning years ago. "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." Adam smiled softly. The journey wasn't over, it never would be. But now he walked forward not with fear, but with unshakable clarity, and that, he realized, was the truest kind of freedom. So here's the question I want to leave you with. If Adam could rebuild his entire life by learning to guard his mind, what's stopping you from doing the same? The truth is, you already have the strength inside you. You just have to decide that your peace, your clarity, and your principles matter more than anyone else's approval. And if this story sparked something in you, don't just close this video and go back to the same patterns. Take one small action today. Maybe it's setting a boundary you've been avoiding. Maybe it's journaling for 10 minutes. Maybe it's finally saying no to the thing that drains your energy. Small actions are how you start building the fortress of your mind. If you want more guidance on living with this kind of strength, subscribe and stay connected. Every week, we explore how Stoic philosophy can help you navigate life with less fear and more freedom. And if there's someone in your life who needs this message right now, share it with them. You never know the impact it could have. Remember, the world will always try to pull at your strings, but the moment you choose to guard your mind, you stop being the puppet. You become the one holding the strings.